My name is Joe Myers, and I'm with Oklahoma State University Library. Today is April 4th, 2012, and I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma, meeting at Oklahoma State University, Tulsa, with Bill Gotcher. I'll be interviewing Bill today as part of the Spotlighting Oklahoma Oral History series of the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. Thank you for meeting with me here today.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. Let's start off, Bill, would you tell me a little bit about your family and what your childhood was like?
Well, I grew up in Oklahoma City. I was born in St. Louis. My mother got a divorce when I was young, about 3, and of course they were trying to live through the Depression, and that was kind of hard on a marriage, I guess. And so she remarried, and I moved with my father, Wilbur Landis, to Oklahoma City, and I grew up there. I went to school, public school in Oklahoma City. I finished at Northeast High School, and when I finished in high school in Oklahoma City, I went to college at Central State College in Edmond. Mm-hmm. And on July the 27th of 1950, I got married. And a week later, they came to the campus and told me to drop my classes. I was going to Korea.
Oh, my goodness.
So I was in the Marine Corps Reserve, and I was planning to be in the States a good long while.
So did you have any brothers and sisters?
No, I'm the only child.
Only child, okay. Going back just a bit, so what was school like for you back in those days?
Oh, I really enjoyed school. You know, I was a typical kid, I guess. I went to school to play sports. You know, I played football and tennis and golf. And, wasn't much good at football. I was too little. Okay. But I did pretty well at golf and tennis, so I enjoyed that very much.
Okay. So you say you were in school, is that right?
Yeah, I enrolled as a pre-med student.
Pre-med student.
In Central State.
Okay.
And my trip to Korea changed that.
So pre-med, what were you hoping to be a doctor?
Yes.
Was there a specialty that you were going to
No,
go
a general doctor.
Just a general medical. Okay. And you had just gotten married. What's your wife's name?
Claritha.
Claritha.
Yeah.
Where did you meet? Where did you meet her?
Actually, we went to the same high school. She was 3 years behind me, and I never knew her there. And actually, I tried to pick her up one day after school. My friend and I were coming back from Edmond, and she was getting on the bus, and he had met her someplace and wanted to introduce me to her. And so we tried to charm her off of the bus and take her home, and she said, "No way, I'm riding the bus home." So when she got home, we were there.
Oh, waiting for her.
That's right. So that's how we met. We had a date the following night, and we've been together every night since.
My goodness. Right. You have children?
3 children.
3 children. What are their names?
My oldest boy is Gregory, and my middle daughter is Gina. She's a student out here, actually, for the 3rd time, I guess.
Here at OSU Tulsa?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And my youngest daughter is a nurse, and her name is Suzanne. And she's at St. Francis Hospital.
Grandchildren?
Yes, I have 4 grandchildren. I have 3 grandchildren. Susie has 3 children. I'm on this spot now. Brian, Blake, and Schnickel Fritz, that's what I call her.
All right.
And my Gregory has 1 daughter. Her name is wow, that's terrible. Sorry.
That's okay. Okay. So, kind of talk about, I guess, the social climate in the lead up to the Korean War. What was that like? Because it was just past World War II in that era.
Well, you know, we were all trying to recover from the recession, you know, the growing up and the poor conditions that we'd lived through, and it was pretty good time, pretty happy time, and you know, and the farthest thing from my mind was a war, and I kind of joined the reserve to have a little extra money. I was going to get married, and I thought, well, I'm still going to school, and that'd be a sort of a little extra income. But as far as thinking about going to war, you know, I joined the Marine Corps because it was glamorous. I didn't think about getting shot at and shooting at other people, you know.
Sure. Now, so the Marines were glamorous. Was that just from films and movies and things like that?
Yeah. John Wayne and that kind of stuff, you know.
Right.
Those Marine Corps films that they had.
Okay. What was that one that they had back then?
Iwo Jima, and there's Sands of Iwo Jima.
Sands of Iwo Jima, right.
Several of them. Guadalcanal.
Yeah. Retreat Hell.
Yeah. That came later.
That did.
Retreat Day later.
Let's see here. So you were in Korea. You were 18 years old. Is that right?
Well, I was 20.
20.
Yeah, I just turned 20
Okay.
when they called me to active duty.
Okay. So when you
That was quite of a quick trip. They came to the campus, told me to drop my classes and report the next day for issue of uniforms and armament. And we were there about 3 days, and we trained for Camp Pendleton on the West Coast.
So you had to report to the Reserve Center in Oklahoma City?
That's
Is that correct? And you drew weapons at that point? And
that's correct.
Did you transport by train?
Boarded the train and went directly to Camp Pendleton. We were there 2 weeks, had combat training, and boarded ship and left for Japan within 2 weeks.
How was, had you been to basic training before?
No, I'd never been to boot camp.
No.
And but I had been to 2 summer camps. And if you'd been to 2 or more, that qualified you not to go to boot camp.
How long were those summer camps?
2 weeks.
2 week summer camps. Where did they?
They were at Camp Pendleton.
At Camp Pendleton.
Yep.
Okay. So everyone would transport out to Camp Pendleton for those 2 weeks for a summer camp.
Everyone west of the Mississippi,
Okay.
and everyone on the other side goes to Lejeune.
Gotcha.
On the other coast.
Okay. I'm interested in those summer camp experiences because I haven't heard a whole lot about those. What exactly would you do during?
Well,
the summer
I think they tried to give us a smattering of what it's like to be in the service. We did field trips and of course long marches and bivouacking, and went to the rifle range and heard a little bit about combat training, personal defense and that kind of thing. And a lot about armament. Took apart machine guns and rifles and put them back together and that kind of thing.
So you're, nowadays it's called an MOS, Military Occupational Specialty. What was your?
Mortarman.
Mortarman. Okay.
311.
311.
0311.
Was that on an 81 millimeter?
No, this was a 60. That's a private company mortar for the company.
Okay.
I think they're used a little differently in the Army, but with the Marine Corps, they have each company has a mortar company.
You mean a mortar platoon?
A mortar platoon, yeah.
Okay. So, for those folks who don't know, how many individuals make up a mortar platoon?
18.
18.
Plus staff sergeant and a lieutenant.
And those are all divided into
6-man crews.
6-man crews.
The gunner, the assistant gunner, and then 3 ammo carriers.
Okay. And that, you said it was the 60 now, that, as far as the mortar, does that denote the size of the barrel?
Yeah, 60 millimeter. It's about a little bigger than this bottle.
Okay. Okay.
And has fins on it and increments.
Okay.
And it's a little bomb, is what it is. And they come in a lot of forms: white phosphorus, shrapnel, percussion, and concussion.
Could you fire illumination rounds with those?
Illumination rounds.
Okay.
And the idea, at least with the Marine Corps, is that each company, each platoon has a section of mortars that goes out on patrol with them, so that they have a convenient artillery piece with them.
Okay. So, so it was a 6-man mortar team.
Right.
How did that divide? How did you divide equipment and armament?
The gunner usually carried the tube, and the assistant gunner the base plate, and the rest of us carried ammo.
Okay. Now those, again, we're getting into an area of technical knowledge that a lot of folks don't have. And we've seen, you know, in movies, films, the mortarman dropping the mortar round into the tube. Exactly how does that fire out of there? Is there a firing pin or something? Like
yeah, there's a firing pin at the bottom of the tube,
mm-hmm.
and the mortar has a firing device under the bottom, and then when it drops and hits the pin, it explodes and shoots that out. Then the increments around the fins determine how far it goes.
Those are packets of explosives.
That's
around
right.
the fins?
Right.
Okay. So how long was that mortar trained? So you learned to fire the mortars during those summer camps?
No.
No. That was during your boot camp at Camp
I
Pendleton?
learned to fire an M1 rifle.
Okay.
At summer camp.
At summer camp, and that was it.
Yeah.
Okay. So you picked up the
It was on-the-job training.
OJT.
Learning to shoot the mortar.
Okay. So as far as the mortars, again, we're going to get into some technical stuff here. A lot of folks don't understand the principle of indirect fire.
Right.
Can you explain a little bit about that? Talk a little bit about that.
Well, of course, there's direct fire, like an anti-tank gun fires directly at the target.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a mortar is essentially made to shoot over trees and over the back of the hill. So if somebody is on the reverse side of the hill, then they think they're protected. But you can take a mortar and shoot over the hill and come back behind them or on top of them. And that's the idea, is to shoot around objects or over objects that could be shielding troops.
Okay. So did you operate through a fire control center to do that?
No, usually the corporal in charge of the section set the stake of the approximate direction, and then he estimated the distance.
Okay. And
the gunner would put the correct amount of increments on the mortar shell.
So that was your aiming stakes?
Right, we use the aiming stakes.
And then from there you could adjust elevation and declination?
Exactly.
Okay. And just to clarify, as far as what elevation and declination are, can you explain that for us?
Well, elevation determines the range, mm-hmm. and declination determines the scope of where you're going to turn. You know,
from right to left.
Right to left.
Okay. Okay. Again, kind of sticking along the lines of training, do you remember, do any instructors, any of your sergeants come to mind that you may have had then? Or corporals?
In training?
During training?
No.
No. No.
No, I got very little training.
Did you? Okay.
I would expect we were getting shots and getting ready to go, and we were only in Pendleton a week before we boarded ship. We went out one day and climbed down the cargo nets on a ship in the bay.
To learn how to climb down the cargo
Right.
nets.
So I got one trip down the cargo net, you know.
Mm-hmm.
As you can remember, perhaps, or maybe if you're not old enough you won't remember, but we were pretty desperate for troops. They had told all the troops, had taken almost all of them out of Korea, and there was nobody there to defend them except the South Korean Army, which was, in my opinion, very poorly trained and equipped.
The South Korean Army.
South Korean Army.
Now, there had been a large reduction in troops after World War II.
Yeah,
Is that right?
they took all the troops out. I think they left 500 American Army, actually soldiers there, I think, throughout
500.
South Korea.
That's like 2 companies.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, and they were mostly peacetime corps. I mean, they weren't trained troops. They were just
So they weren't
military police, essentially.
Okay, so they weren't line troops or anything
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
They were just.
In fact, the Marine Corps had to scrounge all over the world. They brought the 7th Marines through the Panama Canal and directly to Japan. They were on med cruise, and they took the 5th Marines in first directly from Pendleton to Japan, to Korea, directly to Korea, to the Busan perimeter, while they gathered up the rest of the Marine Corps from around the world and put them on troop ships toward North Korea.
Okay. Well, can you tell me anything more about your trip over, as far as once you headed out from California?
We spent the time tearing down and putting our weapons back together, having range fire from the boat out at a buoy or something in the ocean. So they didn't let us lay around and enjoy the sun on the deck. We were doing mostly things to get us familiar with our weapons and comfortable with firing them and the misfire and clearing them and the emergency kinds of things that we needed to do and had no opportunity to do.
So you'd be firing essentially off the side of the ship.
That's correct.
Picking a target at random, or
Right.
they put something out. Okay.
Right.
Okay. That's a moving target.
Yeah,
If you will.
and a bobbling one on
bobbling
both
too.
sides. So if you can hit anything that way, well, you can probably hit something.
Who were some of the men that you served with?
Well, my best friend was my squad leader, Larry Strew.
Was he from here in Oklahoma as well?
No, he was from California, I believe.
And you met him at Pendleton? Is that right?
I met, that's an interesting thing. I was a reserve. I was the only reserve in 17 regulars. 17 regular reserve Marines, and I was the only reserve. They were all from the East Coast, training-wise, and I was from central Oklahoma. Okay, I was an Okie, they were Easterners, they were regulars, I was a reserve, and I was the enemy. So our relationship started off kind of rough. You know, I said hi, and they said, "What the hell do you want?" And I said, "Well, nothing. What do you want?" So we got a kind of rough start, but they turned out to be wonderful guys to be around.
So there's a lot of initial distrust between reservists and regular Army.
Yeah.
Which direction do you think that distrust comes from? Is it more from the regular guys or the reservists?
No, I think if you know Marines, they're all proud guys. They're the best. And they just felt like they were being watered down until they got them together, and some of the reserves from World War II came back, and they saw that they were pretty salty guys and pretty trained and guys. And then it changed. The attitude changed about reserves.
Did you have very many people in your unit that were World War II veterans?
Yeah, I would say 30% probably were World War II veterans.
Did those soldiers occupy more of the leadership roles?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Any of those fellows stand out?
Yeah, I still talk to my lieutenant. His name is Ed Snelling. Lives in Georgia. And talked to him about a month ago. And in fact, tried to get him for our company speaker, and his wife was in ill health and couldn't come. So, but he actually, I attribute to him being living 82 years almost. Quite an officer.
What was he? Do you know any of his history as far as was he a ROTC guy, or did he go
I
through
think
FCS,
he was OCS. Actually, I think he graduated from the University of Georgia. I'm not sure of that, but I think so, and I think he went to Marine Corps officer school.
How did you guys, all the Marines, how did you entertain yourselves when you weren't training on the boats headed over?
I can't really remember any, any relaxation.
Really?
Well, it's a pretty big shock. A troop ship is five tiers high in the staterooms. I guess they were staterooms. Mm-hmm. And there's just room for you to lay with the next guy up here. I mean, there's just space for a skinny man. A fat man can't get in there. You know? So I don't know what they did with those guys.
So you were sleeping five high in that.
Yeah, stacked as all that you could get on a troop ship.
On those bunks in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So during the day, if we had any spare time, we were probably up on deck in the sun, trying to get a little sun. Otherwise, it was kind of like being in a cell with 10 other guys, you know, shoulder to shoulder.
So the fellows that you were with specifically, you were the only Oklahoman that was in your...
There was another Oklahoman there. His name was Calvin Robb. He's deceased now. He was from Oklahoma City. He was a regular. So even he wasn't very friendly till I proved myself.
How did that occur? How did you, what for those folks who don't know, what does it really take to prove yourself when it comes down to between a reservist and a regular?
Fill in.
Or regular military?
Just fill in.
Just fill in. Do your job.
Do your job the way it's supposed to be done.
Okay.
No excuses.
You recall any particularly humorous things that may have happened on the boat, or in your time heading over there, or during training there at Pendleton?
No, I don't remember very many humorous things.
Anything
it was
unusual?
all pretty serious.
Okay.
Yeah.
What kind of things, as far as the seriousness? Let's talk about that, because I think that's what a lot of what we're hoping to.
Well, you know, I think the regular Marines were probably really had a better view of what was going to happen than we did, the reserves. You know, they had a lot more training, they'd had a lot more discussion and about what war is about, what they're about, and we kind of got the quick job, you know, just you do this, you do that, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, kind of a discussion and a description of what we were going to do. And they had kind of taken part in some of that. They had had much more training than most of the reserves. I'm talking about the raw reserves, not the ones that came out of the Second World War. There were the non-coms and the officers.
So what unit were you with when you were in Korea?
Hal Company,
Hal?
3rd Battalion, 1st Marines.
Hal Company?
Hal Company.
Okay. 1st Battalion, 1st Marines?
Mm-hmm. 3rd Section of Mortars. Last peon.
Last peon?
Yeah. Reserve started the last guy on the trail.
Oh.
Bringing up the rear. Get that. Go get this. The only thing you can do right is bring it to me. Some people might find that hilarious.
Mm-hmm. I think so. Let's talk about when you first landed there in Korea. What was the initial plan once you landed there?
Well, to take Inchon
Okay.
and then to go on and take Seoul back to drive the North Koreans back into South Korea. To North Korea.
Okay. So that would be that would have been MacArthur's kind of a left hook initially, right?
Yeah, probably his greatest feat.
Mm-hmm.
And he had lots of opposition. He did it anyway.
Mm.
As he actually got in trouble for doing it anyway. But he actually made the Inchon landing at against the advice of all the people who had anything to do with him. Told him not to do it. Actually, Inchon was mud flats for about 12 hours a day for over a mile out. And they had to come up a very deep trench to Inchon at a certain time of day to even get close enough to go ashore in amphibious boats.
Mm-hmm.
And they did that, and they actually hit Inchon in 2 waves. The 5th Marines hit Wamido Island, which projects out into the ocean and at high tide. And we had to wait 12 hours for the tide to come back in before we could hit Blue Beach, which was right at Inchon.
Was that where you arrived?
I landed at Blue Beach. And there were 2 other beaches, green and red, also in Inchon.
Did you meet much resistance there?
No, we really caught, it was a brilliant move.
Okay.
Even though he was advised not to, it was a brilliant move because he caught them totally unaware. And we had very little resistance. That's not, very little means wasn't as hot as it could have been. Okay, so it wasn't no resistance, but it was much lighter than they expected.
Okay. Was it daytime, nighttime when you rolled in?
Just getting dark, dusk, when we went over the seawall on Blue Beach.
Okay.
By the way, I was supposed to be the 3rd or 4th wave in, and I was the 2nd Amtrak over the wall. It was loaded with mortars, headquarters men, wiremen, flamethrowers.
Mm.
No infantrymen, no machine guns, no anything. That was the 2nd Amtrak over the wall. Mm-hmm. So fortunately we had rifles and sidearms.
So no heavy weapons were there to lay anything down?
No actual company came in on later. You know, and this is pretty standard on an amphibious landing. It's always screwed up. You can imagine when you're trying to get 20,000 men together in boats to come ashore in order. So there's always snafu. You just learn to deal with it.
Kind of organized chaos.
That's right.
So Amtrak, you might let us know what those.
Well, Amtraks have treads that they are both seaworthy and landworthy, and they're open up above, kind of like a cigarette carton with treads on it, full of men floating until they reach land, and then the treads take it up and it goes on land by tread.
Okay.
Slightly armored. It's made out of metal, but nothing that will stop anything. For example, it won't stop a 30-round rifle shell.
Like a 30-30?
Yeah.
Okay.
It'll go through it.
Okay. So that was at Blue Beach. How long did you established there?
We secured the beach and the town by midnight.
Okay.
And then we just started down the road towards Seoul.
How long did that?
It took about 3 days.
3 days.
And it each day got harder. They got more and more troops there. By the time we got to Seoul, they were pretty. Seoul was pretty full of North Korean troops by the time we got there.
So they were backfilling, or they were filling with troops from
They were
Seoul
coming back from the Pusan perimeter to try to stop what they thought was impossible.
Right. And so you reached Seoul. How long? How many days were you there?
Well, we had encountered several things on the way, and about 4 days we got to the Han River where we crossed, and it took us a day to cross there. And we had a tank battle between the time we left Inchon and reached Seoul. I might tell you an interesting thing. We were all digging in for the afternoon, and we were going to stop for the day, and we started receiving incoming mortar rounds, 120 millimeter mortar. Now that's about this big around and about that tall, so they're pretty potent weapons. And the Koreans were firing these at us, and so we had just been cussing and fuming because we were trying to dig in on this rocky mountain side, and they started shelling us with 120 millimeter mortars. You can't imagine how quickly we dug in, through all that rock that we were saying it's impossible, we can't dig a hole in this stuff, and just a few minutes before, and that was very funny afterwards. And we discussed that, about how hard it was to dig in that stuff before those shells coming in, and how easy it was after they started coming in. So there is humor, even with people being wounded and killed in the action. It still gets to be humorous after a while.
How many, during that specific encounter, how many casualties do you think your unit had there?
In that particular incident?
Yeah.
We probably had, I would just guess 10 or 12 dead and 20 wounded.
Okay.
Fortunately, none of our group, immediate mortar section, those 20 guys, none of those were wounded or killed.
So your unit was still intact?
Yeah.
Your section. How was that mortar attack repelled? Did you have close air support? Or?
Yes. Well, of course, the Marines, I guess, invented that, and more or less close air support. And we always had an air wing with us, and they really got us out of Korea, out of the Chosin Reservoir, and a lot of scrapes.
For those folks who don't know, what kind of close air support what would that be comprised of?
Usually a flight of aircraft, fighter aircraft, also carrying bombs and rockets. And they come down where they're close enough you can see them. You can wave at them. They're 100 feet. No, they were. Well, I can't think of what they were. They were prop driven.
Oh, prop
airplanes.
Okay.
But they were down under 100 feet with strafing and dropping bombs and firing rockets. And that's pretty devastating to troops who are receiving on that end. Those 120 millimeter mortars were nothing compared to what they were getting from the aircraft. And that's quite an assistance, man, when you have close air support. You know, and I think the Army actually learned that from the Marines in Korea, that they had been missing something they really needed badly.
How close was that enemy mortar platoon? The 120 millimeters.
Well, I imagine they were firing from at least a mile away, and perhaps 2 miles.
Okay.
60 mortars, the maximum is about 2,300 yards, I think, something like that.
So from your vantage point, from where you were being fired upon?
Well, they are doing, like I said, they were firing from on the reverse side of the slope.
They were on the other side.
On a mile or two away.
So you couldn't see that?
I couldn't see them.
Okay.
It went whoosh-squaw. And if you heard the zoo-squaw, you probably were all right.
Mm-hmm.
Except for the flying shrapnel, of course.
Mm-hmm. When you were over there, we'll shift gears just a little bit. Were you able to stay in touch with family, or how did you stay in touch with family at that point in time?
Well, we rode every day, and the officers were pretty insistent on that, non-coms. They were saying, you need to write.
Mm-hmm.
You just say, hi, Mom, I'm okay, or whatever, but you will write. And they gathered it up and sent it by mail orderly to see that it got off.
So it was just
we got mail about every 3 or 4 days, and I had a lot of people writing me, so you know, unfortunately a lot of the guys didn't, and that's really devastating for the guys who get no mail. You know, when a guy like me gets 10 letters and a cake, you know, and 5 guys sit there with nobody writing, that's bad news.
How did those guys deal with that? How do you think they dealt with that? Was it spoken about, or just did it go?
Well, I think we tried to include them. You know, we tried to share the cake and tell them the news.
Okay. So you're in Seoul at that point in time, and then you're moving up the road from there. What was the initial order to when you moved out from Seoul?
Well, actually, I should tell you a funny event.
Sure.
In the middle of the battle, we had to essentially stand down and go stand parade and guard MacArthur and Reed to come back in so he could be reinstituted as the president of the country. Oh. And he had given us orders that we would clear Seoul by the 25th of September, because that's when they were going to install the president. Well, the North Koreans had another idea. You know, so we were still, the 7th Marines were in heavy combat while they were installing Ri. And they were in the northwest part of Seoul were still in heavy combat. In fact, we had probably 18 or 20 Marines killed over there, and 100 wounded while that was going on. And the rest of us were over there lining the road, keeping MacArthur and Ri safe while they went to the Capitol building.
So
that wasn't taken very well by the Marines then, so.
I'll bet. And so that was just a one-day event where everyone stood down,
right,
made way, and
except the North Koreans.
Except the North Koreans. Okay. So Reed's installed. How much longer were the troops there?
Well,
Marines.
the 7th finished up their action in the next day or two, and they remained, part of them remained there and went on north toward the 38th parallel. And the rest of us went back to Inchon and went aboard ship and went around Korea to the other side, to the east side, and made the Wonsan, the landing at Wonsan.
That was the right hook.
Right.
Okay.
And of course, by the time we cleared the mines from the harbor over there, the South Korean Army then had run the North Koreans back across the 38th parallel, so we didn't have any opposition at the landing at Wonsan. So we went up and down the bay, up and down the ocean out there for about 10 days while they cleared the mines.
Oh, there at Wonsan?
Yeah.
So once the landing took place there, what was the plan after that?
Well, to spread across the west, let's say the eastern half of North Korea along the 38th parallel, and to open those roads to the major cities and to keep them open. My company, 3rd Battalion actually, of the 1st Marines, went to well, it's totally gone.
Madon? John Don, is that right? Is it on your map there?
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, I blocked out on it. Anyway, we were to keep the road open between Seoul and Pyongyang, which is the capital of North Korea. And what the North Koreans did is they just kind of evaporated into guerrillas, into the hills, into the mountains. What a lot of people probably don't realize is that Korea is about 75% mountainous, and they're rugged mountains. They're very steep and very rough to climb, and timbered in the north at least. And they're 500, 600, 700 feet high. The Chosin Reservoir lies about a mile high. So it's very similar to Colorado, you know, those kinds of mountains and that kind of territory, that expanse of treed expanse. And so they just kind of disappear into the hills, you know, into the timber. And there's a lot of mining in Korea. And so there are a lot of mines and a lot of hidden things in the trees and things. And so it was very conducive to hiding a lot of troops so that they were couldn't be observed by the air. In fact, you know, we told MacArthur for over a month that the Chinese were in North Korea, and he wouldn't believe us because the air couldn't find any. And they were all hiding in the mines and the houses. They ran the people out and lived in their houses, put their vehicles, what few vehicles they had, inside the houses. They just knocked out a wall and drove them in. And they're masters at camouflage. The Koreans were really masters at camouflage. You could walk right over them.
Really?
Yeah.
My gosh. Okay, so you're once you've landed at Wonsan and start heading inland, how long was it before you showed in, or before your unit arrived, or started heading towards the?
Well,
Chosin
General
Reservoir?
Lawman, who was in charge of the 10th Corps and MacArthur's right-hand man, got orders for us to go. Our orders were to go up the single road to the Chosin Reservoir and cross over 80 miles of what was actually an animal trail to Quangai, and to intersect with the army who was coming up the west side of North Korea. Well, we got as far as the Chosin Reservoir, and that's as far as we got. And then if you look at the map there, down at the bottom, between Sudong and Coterie is the Treadway Bridge. They blew that bridge out, and that was over a chasm 2,000 feet deep. And it's the only road to the Chosin Reservoir. Now that's hard for us to realize, but there actually were only 3 major roads to the Yalu border through North Korea. One was up the west coast, one was this road, and the other one was up the east coast going through Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea. And so the Chinese figured from the beginning that if they blew that bridge, if they sucked us up into the Chosin Reservoir and let the whole division get up there, they could annihilate the 1st Marine Division because they couldn't get out. Bad planning. Again, the Air Force saved our life. They flew in the pieces of the bridge and they put them back up under fire.
And they had blown that bridge after you'd already passed over that.
That's right.
And so just trying to cut you off.
Right. And of course, the logistics, you know, one of the reasons that the North Koreans bogged down is they outran their logistics. They really they were going hungry. In fact, they were living off the land in South Korea. And then we did the same thing when we got, they started retreating and rapidity, you know. Then we outran our supply lines, and again the Air Force and the Air Wing saved us because they dropped food to us. Well, they didn't have that superiority. Our air took over what air they had, and we cut all theirs off, and so they had to bring it in by pack mule or carrying it, and that's quite a difference when you can drop several tons out of the back of a boxcar, flying boxcar, versus carrying it on a burro. You know? So the advantages we have with the mechanization and the equipment that we have really carried a lot of battles. They were terrific soldiers. The North Koreans and the Chinese were terrific soldiers. They didn't have to bow their head to anybody.
Where did you run into your unit? Run into the first really big scrape?
Well, actually, my unit didn't run in, but the 7th Marines ran into right at the bottom at Sudong. The Chinese sent a full company, full division, 124th Division, and intersected them there on November the 3rd or 4th, 3rd and 4th. And the 7th Marines pretty well wiped them out, and they just disappeared back into the hills. But they pretty much decimated a full division of Chinese troops right there at Sudong in November. And at this point, MacArthur was still saying the Chinese would not dare come across the Yalu border. And of course, O.P. Smith, our general, said, we just disseminated, you know, totally destroyed 124th Division of Chinese troops. And he said, well, they were just trying to get back from the front. You know, so he really couldn't bring himself to believe that the Chinese had crossed the border. MacArthur.
Couldn't believe that.
Yeah. And so they ordered us to go on up the road to go to the Chosin Reservoir and to drive the Chinese back across the Yalu border. while the Chinese were saying, if you cross the 38th parallel, we will definitely come into the war. So we did.
Yeah. So when did you arrive you said you were...
Well, they scattered the Marine Corps over 65 miles.
Mm-hmm.
They left most of the 1st Regiment down at Chin Hung Ni. They took part of it, the 1st Regiment, up to Coterie, and they dropped them off there. And they took the 5th and 7th Marines on up. The 7th Marines went up first, and they went to Udam Ni, clear up at the top of the map there.
Mm-hmm.
And the 5th Marines went over to the east side of the Chosin Reservoir. They decided that when we were to cross this 60 miles of forest via the road, they called it, which was essentially an animal trail, unable to drive trucks or jeeps or anything, any kind of mechanized vehicles on it. That's how bad the road was. They brought up the 7th Division, Army 7th Division, and they took the Marines' place on the east side of the reservoir. That was about 3,200 men. They were essentially wiped out. They had about 500 able-bodied men left that came to Haggeroo, straggled in to this Haggeroo. The rest of them, I'm sure some of them still buried, laying up there east of Chosin. Right at 3,000 men wounded and killed on that side. This 5th Marines then left and joined the 7th Marines and started across the trail, across the way. They got about 3 or 4 miles before the Chinese hit them, and they withdrew. And this whole time, so they had, we actually had 20,000 plus the Army, which was another 3,400 men up there, strung out across that trail of about 60 miles. In these, it was in separated valleys though, a bunch here and a bunch there and a bunch here and a bunch there, totally separated except by a 14-foot road trail, dirt, you know. So they were isolated. Each group was totally isolated. I mean, you could hear all hell breaking loose in the next valley, but you couldn't see anything. You could only hear it, you know. And you were in your own valley, you couldn't leave your own valley, you know, because you had to have a perimeter defense there, you know.
Right. What,
the actual fighting started, heavy fighting started on the 28th. Their kickoff, the Chinese kickoff to annihilate the 1st Marine Division, according to received communiques that they intercepted. The 28th was the day that they were going to begin the total wipeout of the Marine Corps Division, the 1st Marine Division.
where were you at?
I was at Haggeroo, right here at the bottom of the, and that's where the road divided between the east side and the west side of the reservoir. Mm-hmm. And that was our supply dump. Mm. And munitions and food and medical and all of it was right there. We had 2 companies to man a 2-mile perimeter. 2 companies, a headquarters unit, a few just odds and ends, motor transport. We had in total there probably 900 to 1,000 men at Haggeroo, trying to man a 2-mile perimeter. And you can imagine, having been in the service, the foxholes were probably 100 yards apart. Mm-hmm. which is not much of a perimeter, you know. And we were overrun. And there are lots of in every battle there are a lot of key events that could have gone either way. And for example, the 56th Division was supposed to hit Hagaroo on the night of the 27th. They got lost in the mountains. And they were the only division that did not hit their objective on the 27th. All the rest of these were hit on the 27th. Between the 27th and November and December 1st, this Army unit was wiped out, and much of these units were wiped out. And they failed to reach their objective, and when they got there, we were already ready for them and had flown in some reinforcements. We were still only about 900 men hit by a division, which was their divisions, Chinese divisions, are about 10,000 plus supplementary.
And that took place after dark?
Always after dark. They learned not to fight in the daylight.
What?
Unless it was overcast where the planes couldn't fly in the mountains, then they'd come out. But otherwise it was, you could almost count at 11 o'clock. By 10:30 or 11 o'clock, you were being visited.
Was there anything that they would do to signal that they were on the way?
Well, you could smell them before you could see them.
Really?
They used, they hid in the caves and things, so they used the mineral you put in water.
Sulfur?
No.
Or not sulfur, but
anyway, they used it to light, and it stinks like raw garlic, terribly strong. And you could lie in your foxhole and smell that they were around you. As it was all, and they were wearing those padded uniforms. It was all in their clothes, and you know the odor. So by the odor, we could tell that they were around. And the trumpets and whistles, and this, everybody, I guess, who knows anything about the Chinese Army, that's the way they signaled. They didn't have any radio intercoms, mostly like us. Maybe the majors and the generals had them, but none of the troops had them. So they used police whistles, tweet, 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 attack, tweet, tweet, retreat. Bugles, same way. And I started to bring a bugle, but I didn't today, that I brought home. But that's as much psychological as it is directional, you know, because you have no imagination of what that's like to hear those bugles going on all the hills around you. Tweet, tweet, and the bugling all around you. For 20 or 30 minutes in dead darkness. You know, so you know they're saying, we're here, guess where? You know? And so they use psychological warfare pretty well. You know,
the bugles and the whistles, the psychological warfare.
It's pretty frightening.
It had a pretty good effect on the guys that you knew, or?
Well, you know, they were pretty stable, but you know, I have to admit it was pretty hair raising to know that they're all around you and that they have unlimited supply, and that's what we thought, that they had all the men they could ever want. You know, that was the rumor that they had over 150,000 men up at the Yalu border, so we knew we were grossly matched, you know, as far as man for man. Fighting in the dark is pretty scary, you know, and I was a mortarman, and my job was, most of the time, was to bring in ammunition. So they sent me back the evening of the 28th, which we were under fire. They had overrun our 3rd platoon and broken our perimeter, and I told you they were stretched pretty thin. And they sent me back to the ammo dump, which was about probably 100 yards behind our mortar emplacement. In the dark by yourself, well, another fellow and I. And we got back there and encountered a couple of Chinese on the way that had gotten through our lines. Fortunately, you know, the Chinese were hungry, and they were more interested in what they could scrounge in the field kitchen back in the back than they were to kill people who they'd just gotten through, you know. So they were looking for food, and we were able to put an end to their existence. And so we went into the ammo dump and got ammo and brought it back. And when I got back, the section leader said, you know, we're short on white phosphorus shells, and one of you needs to go back and get more white phosphorus for illumination and other things. So I said, oh, I'll do that. Gung ho, you know. First thing you learn in the service is don't volunteer. Okay. So that was out before I could stop it, you know. So I went back, and they said, oh, we've killed all those guys anyway. And I said, well, let's hope so. I got back, I opened the gate into this little hut where we were storing the ammo, and guess who was standing there? A Chinese soldier with a burp gun. You know? Fortunately, mine fired and his didn't. So that was kind of a shock, and after I kind of recovered from that, I grabbed 2 canisters of white phosphorus mortar shells and started back to the gun emplacement, and that's the last I remember. A big explosion happened, and I came to sometimes later with the canisters thrown away apart, and me laying there feeling to see if I had all my arms and legs, and I couldn't get up, and I stumbled and staggered around for a while, and finally got to my feet, and I couldn't move my right arm. But it was dark. It was about, by that time, it was around 2:30 in the morning, I think, something like that. So I staggered back to the emplacement, and guess what? I didn't have the white phosphorus canisters. You know, I did still have my carbine, you know, but I went back into defense. I was in terrible pain, but you know, I was more scared, I guess, than hurt. Anyway, at daylight, when dawn broke, why, everything quieted down, and they just disappeared into the hills. And I have to say, out in front of us, there were, by body count, there were over 1,000 dead Chinese in about a space of about 100 yards.
That's out in front of you.
Out in front of our 3rd platoon that they had broken through. And I have to share with you the most shaking event that I had in Korea is we were out there checking to see if there were any Chinese still alive, and there was one guy kind of hunched up like this, and I walked over and took my foot and pushed him over. And when he fell out, his jacket fell out, and in his hand was a picture of a woman and a man and a child and a cross. Sorry.
It's okay.
as you can tell, that was quite a shock.
Sure.
First time I really ever thought of those men as people. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Do you want to take a quick break?
Yeah. I'm okay. As I'll ever be.
Yeah. It's difficult. It is difficult.
Well, I think people need to know that war is really hell. That it's not just a slogan.
No. I don't know.
And when you finally realize that those are people you're killing, you know, it's one thing when they're at dots on a hill or at 1,000 yards, figure this tall, they're just stuff. But when it's close up, they're just people like you.
Yeah. That's true. That's true. What,
Anyway, I turned in the next morning at aid station, and there were approximately 800 or 900 Marines and soldiers up there in all forms of living and dying and death. So I finally stopped the corpsman, and he said, well, let me take a look at it. You probably are all right. You're still moving around. So we tried to get my parka off, and he finally just gave up trying. It hurt so bad. And he said, well, I think what you've had is a dislocated shoulder. So he popped it, and I guess he popped it back in or something. And anyway, he put it in a sling, and he said, that's the best I can do for you going back to your unit. And he said, we've got more critical ill, and he said, this afternoon or sometime, why don't you come back and we'll see what else we can do for you. Well, I never went back. I walked out of the Chosin Reservoir thing with the rest of the Marines that were left. They were still flying in replacements. MacArthur finally said, destroy all your equipment and fly out. And O.P. Smith said, nope, we're walking out. And we're going to show these Chinese troops that they don't know who they're messing with. And so we walked out.
so you had to come back out through Hellfire Valley.
Yes.
How was that?
Well, there was a roadblock. There were 5 days before we even started. We only started out on the 6th of December. So each one of these valleys was in chaos for 28th, 9th, 30th, through the 4th of December. And on the 6th of December, we started from Hagaroo to Coterie, which is still on the other side of the Lone Bridge, inside the perimeter of the being surrounded. There was a roadblock about every mile or less that we had to clear. Yeah. And of course we had to take the high ground on both sides and then clear the road. So that took another 5 days. We actually were, I think we crossed over the bridge on the 10th of December. So we were up there about 20 days. The temperature was an average of 40 below zero. And the wind was coming down off of the Mongolian, through Siberia and the Mongolian steppes at about 40 to 50 miles an hour at a mile high. And so the weather was absolutely, unbelievable. In fact, it was so cold you were just numb. You just didn't. It was just numb. That's all. We were wearing everything we had. I was wearing a pair of green wool pants, dungarees, long johns, shorts. I think I had on 2 pair of dungarees, a parka, a dungaree jacket, a sweater, everything I owned, just about, I was wearing. And the first thing, I did a lot of speeches around. The first thing everybody asked me is, how'd you go to the bathroom? I said, well, very seldom, and very quickly, and wide out in the open. At 40 below zero, you don't take long. So there are some funny things, even as bad as it is. Yeah. And one of the funny incidents is on our way out, we were, another guy was taking a relief, and he had all his clothes down, and as I say, we were all blue from cold, and every time he'd squat, a sniper would shoot at him, and it was obvious he wasn't trying to hit him, because he'd hit 10 feet from him, and he'd yank his pants up, and he'd run and hide, try to hide. And then in a few seconds, he'd go back out and pull his pants down, and the sniper would shoot. That went on for like 10 minutes before we could find the sniper. He swore that we'd found him a long time before we found him. But, funny things like that do happen. And you find ways to laugh, even in tragedy.
Absolutely. Friends of yours over there during that time in the Mortar Platoon. Well, let me back up as far as the Mortar Platoon goes. When you're on the road and you're traveling like that, where do you set up? I don't think a lot of folks would understand that. You clearly don't set up on the road, so do you back off the road a ways and set up camp there for the night and wait for attack?
You don't set up camp.
You don't set up camp.
Once we left Hagerud out, we were all on the road.
And no backing off the road?
No back. Well, we put out flanking defense, So we tried to own the high ground beside the road along where we were going. Now, when we had 14,000 people on the road, plus tanks, plus trucks, plus all the equipment, it was all on the road. So actually, when we left Hagerud, it stretched almost to Coterie, which was 12 miles away, I think. About 10 miles, and from front to back it was about 8 miles long, and it was moving only to the first roadblock, and then to the next roadblock, and to the next roadblock, and each time we had to put out defense out away from us to keep the Chinese from attacking us while we were on the road. Had I been running the Chinese army, that's where it would have ended, right there. Because it was snowing and the cloud banks and the mountains, the planes couldn't do us much good, and I would have stopped us long before we got to the bridge had I been running the defense. They chose not to do that. They thought, number one, they'd blown the bridge and we couldn't get out with our equipment. And number two, that they could do that anytime they wanted to. So they were interested in just, their prime object, and none of the other guys are going to like this, but their prime object was to knock out Hagaroo, because that's where all the supply dump was and where General Smith was, and the command post and all of that was right there. So that was the objective, and they blew it. The Chinese division that was given that objective blew it. They were a day late, and that probably sealed their doom, because we were able to get in reinforcements and supplies. And
that was the regiment that got lost.
right.
Okay.
But it was a matter of stop and go for 2 days, from Hagaroo to Coterie. Took us 2 days to do that and to clear all the roadblocks. And of course, the roadblocks entailed probably maybe a company strength around, or half a company, where they have a roadblock. There's more up in the hills and around, but that's all that's right there that you're in a firefight with, probably.
Like you were talking before, having to go to the bathroom, something that's got to happen every day.
Yeah.
Eating does too.
Yeah.
Taking meals and.
Well, we had sea rations. Again, a comedy, trying to eat them. You're in a high altitude, 40 below zero. All the canned food's frozen. You put it in the fire, it burns on the bottom, still frozen on top. So the best you could do is put it on the manifold of a vehicle. Well, most people didn't have any vehicle, so we usually put it in the fire and ate it charred. You know, the most popular thing was the cocoa. We ate that dry sometimes, just like candy. Terrible, you know, but better than nothing. Crackers, things that are in sea rations. Most people have no idea what are in sea rations, but it's like canned food and dehydrated food, that kind of thing, and little packages. So you get one of those each day, and it had a pack of cigarettes. Isn't that wonderful? We furnished our trip with a pack of cigarettes. But it was important then. Those guys that almost trade you all their food for a pack of cigarettes, a lot of them, if they hadn't had any all day. So, and it had toilet paper, and it had gum occasionally, and bar candy, and a heavy, like pork and beans, that was considered a heavy food, and crackers, and cocoa, and coffee, instant coffee, sugar, instant sugar, and sugar. So that's what you had to eat. They gave it to you once a day, and you had to make it last all day, you know, and eat it the best you could. Most of the time we ate it in our foxhole, you know, have a little opener, a little can opener that you opened it with, and you did the best you can. You took the bayonet out and dug it out and put it inside your parka next to your skin until it was thawed enough that you could chew it. You know, and then you'd take it out and eat it and swallow it. And of course, terrible for you, frozen food. You can imagine eating that for 14 days. Well, actually, the whole time we were up there, we were eating frozen food. And it was crystallized, at least. It was never thawed. You know, it was at least crunchy. You know? So soup was crunchy.
Wow. What about sleep during that If you
Best
could
you
get
could.
Best you could.
Well, up until, in combat, you usually are on tours of sleep. They break it up into 3-hour periods maybe. So you're on 3, off 3, on 3, off 3. If you're in a foxhole, then you or your buddy's awake all the time. One of you's awake.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a third, then one out of 2 holes is awake. So there's one person in every other hole or something, So it depends on what they're expecting. So essentially, you sleep outdoors. You get it in 2 and 3 hour snatches. You rest when you can, sleep when you can. Boring. Sitting in a hole looking for the enemy, mostly is what you do most of the time. Talk a lot, and where you get to know those foxhole buddies better than you know anybody else, because you're there 24 hours a day. He sees you at your worst, you see him at his worst, and they're best.
What are some examples of the best?
I was the only married man in the mortar section. I had people going on patrol for me because I was married. That's the best.
Yeah.
It's amazing how a bunch of tough, selfish, crude Marines are so thoughtful and self-sacrificing. And I apologize, but you know that I can't help it.
No apologies needed. Like that.
I love those guys.
Sure.
And you get to know them better than you do anybody else.
I understand that.
And I'm sure all guys who've been in combat come home wondering why they came back. Hopefully, anybody that sees this will know when they hear that slogan that war is hell, what it means. And what it takes for a guy to say, let me go. When he knows that the probability is that he won't be back.
I'm sure if the rules were reversed, you'd have been
I did.
volunteering the same fashion.
Yeah. They're all the same. Yeah. You're one.
Absolutely.
It's a terrible experience, but you know, if there were only a pill we could give people to help them know what war is really like,
Yeah,
we wouldn't have it yet.
absolutely. Absolutely. How about, that's the best of things. The worst of things that as far as examples of people, and it could be from either side, because that sort of thing kind of doesn't have a side, show up anywhere, you know. What, is there anything that comes to mind?
Oh, you know, hatred fuels hatred. You know, atrocities happen. They do bad things to you. We'll get even for that. You know, that's a common emotion. And you think about it later and it's terrible. But at the time, like I say, they're just ants, or they're trying to kill me, so why shouldn't I do something worse to them? That's the way you rationalize it, I guess. It's just terrible to kill another human being. It has to be done, and you have no choice. I mean, it's killed or be killed, you know. And we ought to consider those things much more carefully than we do before we do it easily.
So now you had gotten to the Treadway Bridge, and the Air Force had flown in a replacement bridge. I'm guessing. I've seen.
Well, I think what they used were those holy pieces of metal. I've forgotten what they're called, that they make runways with.
Mm-hmm.
And they flew those in, and they flew in 8 of them. They lost 2 of them to the Chinese when they dropped them, but they only needed 4, and so they actually had enough. They did use another terrible thing about war is they used Chinese bodies to shore up the far side to lay the bridge on, because part of it was blown away. So they stacked those dead Chinese frozen bodies in there as a barricade for the bridge to sit on, to bring out all the trucks and tanks and all that stuff over them. So,
Like foundation.
yeah, another unholiness of war, you know, they just use them for stockade to build on.
I had seen and researched and read and researched about frozen bodies being used for sandbags,
Right.
essentially,
Yeah.
cover,
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
It's hard to use your best friend for a sandbag, but you have to look at it like he's dead and I'm still alive. And I have to stay alive to keep the guy next to me alive.
That's right. You said you're.
You know, I might tell you a little bit about the Chinese. They, as bad as we had it, they had it real worse.
Okay.
You know, they had padded uniforms, you know, and most of them had padded jackets and no overcoats that I ever saw. The prisoners we took, their feet were frozen up to the knee. They looked like loaves of bread that had split open while baking, you know. It was horrible to watch them try to walk, and you know, we at least had the road. They were trying to come through the snow and the mountains and the forest. How they did it, I don't know. Man, I could barely make the road, and they were coming through the timber up on top of the hills. You know? So it's just a terrible experience for everybody. You know. You would think we'd find a better solution for the problems of the world than that.
Other than the explosion that occurred, and then your shoulder that was dislocated, did you have any other injuries that occurred, or any other wounds?
I finally finished out my tour, and I never was able to use my right arm much again.
So it was a little bit more than a dislocated shoulder.
Yeah, it was a broken neck, and a dislocated shoulder, and a broken collarbone, and injured lower back, and a bad hip, knee, and right ankle, broken right toe, big toe, and a broken thumb.
Goodness.
And I walked out 60 miles.
Or 60 total.
60
It was 10 miles just to
Coterie.
To Coterie.
Yeah, and about 10 miles from Ham Hung, where they shipped us out, they did transport us from there on. But I finished out my tour in Korea. Actually, I went to the sick bay in Mason, and a 26-year-old JG doctor told me he didn't think there was much wrong with me, that I'd get over it. And going back to my unit, and the soreness will go away.
Rub some dirt on it.
Yeah, yeah. He gave me some pain pills and told me to go on back, so I did. I came home in April and May. I went down, I was stationed at McAllister, Oklahoma, at the ammo dump. And I went to sick bay there, and they gave me diathermy treatment, and never even did an x-ray.
That would have been 1951.
And I still couldn't do the manual alarms. So they put me on the main gate where I had a sidearm. I could get it out of the holster after fumbling around a while and cock it if I needed to. And so when I got out in 1951, I tried to go to work for the fire department in Oklahoma City, and I had to do a physical. And they sent me to a doctor and did an x-ray, and they found out that I'd had a broken neck and a dislocated shoulder, and that my collarbone had been broken and not reset. And so anyway, from there. And they rejected my disability in 1951. And I'm happy to tell you, 3 weeks ago, I got 100% disability after a 60-some-odd year battle.
That's a hell of a battle.
Yeah. Well, mostly my fault, because I was so mad in 1951. I came home, I was mad to everybody about everything, and probably had PTSD or whatever that is, and didn't know it. My wife knew it. She said I was hell to get along with. And
how so?
Short fuse. Very frustrated all the time and not being able to get it done now, and why everybody's screwed around, and no patience, and just frustrated. Don't know why.
Can't imagine.
No. At any rate, I'm still here for some reason. I don't know why.
Were you awarded any medals or?
Yeah, I was put up for the
Citation.
Bronze Star, but I got the Commendation Medal, Navy Commendation Medal.
Okay.
It was kicked down, knocked down. It's interesting how that happens. You're recording this, aren't you? Well, I find it interesting. The guy I went to on this to get this ammunition with got the Bronze Star. He was a regular. I got the Commendation Medal, and I was a reserve. We did the same thing, and I went back a second time. So you figured out.
Yeah. I guess it just depends on who's submitting the paperwork.
That's absolutely true. Who saw it, who wrote it up, makes a huge difference. It really does. And on top of that, most of the guys who deserved the medal didn't get one. And the ones who did get them probably deserved something else, whatever that was. They were all doing just what they were supposed to do anyway.
Yeah. Is there anything anything you carried with you for good luck? Anything special? Anything
Carried the New Testament
New Testament. Was that one of the little
in my breast pocket of my dungarees.
little Gideon bombs?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I still have it. And it's well used.
All right.
Was well used.
All right.
I was always a little bit on the religious side. In fact, I came home, I dropped out of pre-med and went into public school music program. I was a singer, vocalist, and I also played the trumpet and French horn. And so I went that route, and I became a minister of music and religious education for the Methodist Church. Far cry from being a tough, rough, crying Marine. But that was a result of reading that testament and being in Korea, I think, going into the church work. I had many ministers trying to tell me that I should have been a preacher, and I said, no, I'm not good enough to be a preacher. So I did a secondary role as a church musician and education director. So I never became a minister, but they did that anyway because I ended up being the campus minister at Durant College at the Wesley Foundation when I was down there at the First Methodist Church. So I guess God put you where He wants you.
That's right. That's right. Did you, during your time in the service, did you keep a diary or journal or anything like that?
Nothing regular. I did occasionally write down here and there, but not daily. I wish I had. And my grandson is a Marine who just got out of the service, and I urged him to do it, and I don't think he did it either. Like all of us, we didn't have time for that.
Sure. So where were you when the Korean War ended? Where were you at then? Here in Oklahoma.
Yes, I was still in Oklahoma City.
So,
In fact, I was still going to school in Central State, I believe. Let's see, it ended in '53, I believe, June of '53. Yeah, I was still in college at Central State.
Was your education supported by the GI Bill at that
Yes.
time? So you had some close relationships, as most servicemen do. Do you continue any of those relationships?
Well, I've tried. My best buddy was killed, or well, not my best buddy, but my squad leader, and was killed at Hagaroo.
Was that,
Volo. No, that wasn't Strud. That was, he took Volo's place.
what was his name? The fellow that was?
Robert Volo, I believe, was, I only knew him by Volo.
Okay.
Yeah. He won the Silver Star that night. He was up running around trying to fill those holes that he was the squad leader of the Mortars, but he was out trying to fill the 3rd platoon holes.
And he got the Silver Star.
Yeah.
For his actions
Yeah.
that evening. Do you know the details of that?
No, I really don't. You really only know, I know all the names of the guys in the mortar section, but I was with them very little. I probably know more people in the 3rd platoon than I did in the rest of the mortar section, because my section went out with the 3rd platoon of Hal Company on patrol all the time. So I knew more of those guys than I did the rest, and better than I did the rest of the mortar platoon. So, I know Bill Wida, he was a machine gunner, and I know, I remember George Sagal, he was a mortarman. He was in another section of the mortars. Bill Randall, I've never been able to reach. He was my foxhole buddy after my first foxhole buddy was wounded. Eugene Breen was wounded and left early in the war, before we went up to the Chosin, after we went into North Korea, but before we went to the Chosin. And Bill Randall, I've never been able to reach after our service years. So 2 or 3 of the others are deceased now. Calvin Robb I talked to. Actually, he supported wrote a letter supporting my injury at Haggeroo, and he's deceased. And Bill Neff, he was from Nebraska. I've never been able to reach him. Another one of the guys is deceased, so they're just mostly gone. My close buddies.
Did you join any of the veterans organizations?
Nope.
Like after?
I shared with you that I was angry about it, and I was really, really angry about the fact that I was messed up that badly, and they had a nonchalant attitude about it. I was really hostile about it. Like I was trying to get something I didn't earn. Did I share the? Yeah, I did. The JG at the Mason said, "You'll be all right. The pain will go away. Gave me some pain pills."
Yeah.
That was their solution for my injuries. And I say that was mostly my fault, because I quit pushing. I just said, to hell with it. Who needs you?
That was the BFW guys or the
Everybody,
Legion?
anybody. I did what I thought was right, and this is what I got, so who needs you?
Cut bait and
Yeah,
move on.
I'll live my life. And I met a guy here in Tulsa who said, "You need to come out and join the Chosin Few." And I said, "I did. What is it?" And he told me. So
When was that?
here I am, the president of the Northeast. That was about 7 or 8 years ago.
Huh. Is he still around? Or is he passed on?
He's passed on.
Um,
He was the president.
he was the president. met up with you and
Yeah.
recruited you.
Yeah.
How often do you guys meet?
We meet once a month at Goldie's out on 21st and Memorial, close to 21st and Memorial.
Okay. Are they your?
And there are about, well, there's probably about 16 or 17 of us around the Tulsa area in this end of Oklahoma left, but only about 8 or 10 still come. Some of them are not physically able. There are about 3 or 4, and we're passing away pretty often.
Sure.
So they're all over 80. So.
Did you ever, or were you ever able to go back to Korea? I know that the government of Korea has a program.
Yeah, I've tried several times. I got ill one time that we were going, and in the last few years, I just haven't felt like I was physically able to be gone.
Sure.
And be away from doctors.
Sure. Yeah, that's.
I'm a diabetic, and I'm got other problems. So.
That's a long flight.
Yeah. and I haven't slept in a bed for 25 years. I've slept in a recliner because of my back and shoulder injury and pain. So I'm, on narcotics all the time.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. This is. I'm just always interested in this. From servicemen. You volunteered.
Yes, sir.
Would you do that again?
Yes, sir.
Why that? Tell me. I mean, at the core of it, why? And why do you think that's important?
I love my country. Somebody has to pay the price of freedom. We like these slogans. Freedom is not free. Doesn't mean anything to most people. It's just words. Yeah. It takes somebody to defend it. Because there's always somebody who wants to take it away.
Absolutely. Is there anything else you'd like to add that you don't think we've covered?
No, I just think there's, number one, service people don't really want your praise. They want you to understand that somebody has to do that. And it's not fun. It's gut-wrenching. Somebody has to do it. And they want everybody else to know that they're willing.
Well, I want to thank you for your time, for coming in and speaking with us about your service, and thank you for your service as well. Appreciate it. All right.